Welcome to Chet Davidson and Coventry's Asylum, a rugged, notoriously deplorable past by Charles Vacca Jr. Old Chet Davidson was a living historical enigma in his time. You see, the then 85-year-old self-proclaimed individualist was calling the old Briggs farm circa 1790, later Coventry's poor farm home back in 1949. Davidson acquired the edifice on Town Farm Road, across from the site of colonial mustering, but did not reside there until 10 years later, in 1979. My journalism colleague, Rick Agajanian, wrote a feature story on Davidson. He lives in the old town poor farm, but my neighbors say he could be the richest man in the neighborhood, wrote Agajanian. Despite its expanse of 12 to 15 rooms, the building has fallen into pathetic disrepair. It wouldn't pass minimum housing regulations. He only uses two of the rooms. As the story goes, Davidson managed to eke out a living, much like former residents of the poor farm, owning 3 cows and 5 chickens, along with 5 canines, and surviving off the land as much as possible, without lights, electricity, a sink, or running water by choice. He likes it that way. Historian Don D'Amato tells us Coventry purchased a 1790 federal period farmhouse bearing a unique L from Joseph Briggs in 1850. Social reforms were often slow and painful. The problem of caring for the chronically ill, the aged, the homeless, and the destitute was always present, wrote D'Amato. In the town's purchase of the Briggs farm, more than 14 sites on the National Register was consistent with similar acquisitions by towns elsewhere. Coventry's concern for its least fortunate dated back to the 1770s. See citation for photo of credit. Apparently, society during the early 1800s was starting to change rapidly as the soon-to-be outdated artisan and agrarian systems were quickly surrendering to meager-paying manufacturing jobs, replacing apprenticeships. To substitute for apprenticeships and obsolete crafts, journeymen now sought to place their children in public schools where they could get an education suitable for the clerical job, proliferating in an industrialized and urbanized society, according to Pulitzer Prize-winning author Daniel W. Hall. Needless to say, this left a void in society. Gabriel J. Lacano wrote on June 25, 1819, many of Newport's most prominent citizens were present, forming a procession with one Masonic lodge as it said, the other at sail, marching north along the waterfront before boarding boats to ferry them to the deserted coast of Harbor Island. Precisely at 12 noon, the assembled crowd witnessed the laying of the cornerstone of an important new town building. One side of the cornerstone, metal read, "This cornerstone laid June 25th and 43rd year of the American independence." The other side read, "Newport Asylum, erected 1819." Newport's elite had turned out, with pomp and circumstance, to mark the construction of a new poorhouse that would accommodate any and every Newporter in need. That site closed sometime during the 20th century, sold to the federal government. Within 30 years, 31 Rhode Island cities and towns constructed poorhouses or asylums, defined as an institution for the care of or relief of the aged, destitute, insane, or otherwise afflicted. A refuge protection. Webster's New American Dictionary in 1956 UD, according to Oceana, historians of social welfare paid close attention to the advent of poorhouses in the United States. Usually, they have advanced the argument that reformers intended these poorhouses either as a means of social control or as part of an emerging culture of benevolences. This movement coincided with similar efforts to put society in some sort of order, including education, prisons, hospitals, and most various social services. Apparently, among the records of social reformers and town officials who spearheaded asylum construction during this period, poorhouse proponents thought that cutting the cost of poor relief, that cutting taxes to support the poor, was the most pervasive argument in favor of building poorhouses. But in a familiar theme, some reformers complained that the public was being taken advantage of by these sturdy beggars, who should have been working for their food. So this was a means to exercise social control over the needy. Still others touted that poorhouses prevented the deplorable treatment of paupers and served as a more benevolent way to address the problem. However, in the long term, poorhouses were usually not successful in keeping relief costs down. These institutions did affect the sea change in the lives of the needy. Poorhouses markedly increased the geographic isolation of paupers from the social communities of their towns, observes Luciano, usually located on farms away from the towns, population centers. Poorhouses concentrated the needy in one spot and cut them off from friends and neighbors. Ironically, Coventry's Asylum at Briggs Farm was located on Town Farm Road, once described and recognized as the town's main thoroughfare during this period. These institutions completely changed paupers' lives, with their geographic isolation and strict rules regulating residents' comings and goings and visitors. That resulted in significant reduction in everyday interactions between asylum residents and the community's other members. Luciano wrote this led to form an even greater social cleavage than had previously existed between the people at large and the poor. What was more alarming is historians now believe that during a period where social reforms were cutting away at the divisions in propertied and non-propertied classes, those legal distinctions and disparities in Rhode Island were increasing. The poorhouse and a series of new poor laws defined and pushed paupers out of Rhode Island's political and social communities, wrote Luciano. So what was the social reform experience like elsewhere? In nearby Scituate, Lydia Bates, 18 years old, was auctioned off in 1818 by the town's town council to another household rather than an asylum or poorhouse. Bates was fortunate as she came under the control of a good candidate households, transferred among at least 6 homes, and apparently enjoyed a modest social life foreign to most poorhouse residents. However, Bates soon became pregnant, which led to her introduction into the state's judicial system, then under the jurisdiction of the Rhode Island Supreme Court. Back then, under these circumstances, the baby's father or the town of Scituate would be responsible for the newborn's support. But Bates' overseer was also considered liable for preventing further costs to the town, such as support of Bates' child. Eventually, Thomas T. Hill, a foster vendor of household goods, was accused of being the father. It was his subsequent social appeal in related interviews that showed Bates as a pauper led a rather robust social life. In Tiverton, the town fathers did not get around to purchasing a poorhouse pictured until 1830, which they accomplished from the Gray family for $4,300. Tiverton authorized a subcommittee to stock the farm with livestock and to finish the house standing on said farm in good and plain manner. The Tiverton poorhouse was ready for habitation by 1832. See photo. Molly Kirker tells us life was not easy for inmates. Burdened with endless chores, they raised pigs and cattle and cultivated corn and other grain, roots and vegetables and provisions. Inmates lived under strict supervision of the farm caretaker who lived on site to discipline and reform the poor. Annual inspection by the town's officials and written accounts submitted by the overseers of the poor ensured that the caretaker and inmates managed resources for the benefit of the town. All of the overseers expected the farm to be self-sufficient. By 1886, those annual records ceased, marking a slow transition from a strictly regulated poor farm to that of a refuge for the elderly and disabled. Besides the realization that poorhouses may have not been the resolution, it was President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal invasion of Social Security which brought the eventual demise of Tiverton's poorhouse. No discussion regarding Rhode Island poorhouses is complete without mention of Shepherd Tom Hazard, 1797 to 1886. A retired factory owner and sheep farmer, Hazard apparently took it upon himself to make a personal visit to the asylum in Newport and to every other Rhode Island town, i.e. then 13 but one. Hazard's goal was to visit the poor and insane of each town and to discover how well the towns were meeting their responsibilities to provide shelter, clothing, and medical care for those townspeople who could not provide for themselves, according to Luciano. Hazard happily noted that the town of Scituate had an asylum, pleasantly and conveniently situated on the road, well arranged for the accommodation of the poor, and appearing to be well conducted. Then came Coventry, which notoriously failed Hazard's examination on the same day of the Scituate inspection in 1850, when Coventry was still auctioning off its poor and disabled to private households. Luciano tells us that Hazard found Coventry's poor in the most deplorable condition imaginable. The house in which they were huddled was old and dilapidated, and the furniture was absolutely unfit for the use of most degraded of savages. Hazard was further shocked by the food served to the pauper residents, a dish of watery, unripe potatoes, which not even enough of them to quench the inmates' hunger. In other visits, Hazard found the care of the poor in Lyons ranged from very bad to very good. And its bad conditions were usually attributable to the mixing of insane paupers with sane residents and the absence of poorhouses or asylums, in which many of the town's poor could be kept comfortable and efficiently. In 1851, Hazard issued a report followed by his criticism that Lyons paupers were treated similarly to those Africans enslaved in the South, referring to Harriet Beecher Stowe's index to non-fictional cruelty to slaves. Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, Hazard wrote that he could collect and authenticate narrative of outrages, wrongs, and cruelties equally numerous and atrocious in character as those detailed by Miss Beecher. A lot of the abuses that have occurred within the last 30 years in the asylums and poorhouses of the little state of Rhode Island. Hazard promoted the further establishment of poorhouses or asylums, which were integrated within the community and regularly visited by local residents. That ideal was never realized. Coda. Soon after Hazard's scathing report of Coventry's care of its poor and disabled, Coventry's town council managed to standardize its asylum conditions by 1853 with its rules and regulations for the government of asylum in Coventry, Rhode Island. From that date, the poorhouse asylum at the former Riggs Farm would be overseen by a master of the asylum and matron. Again, by the FDR New Deal administration, the asylum experiment there had long ended as elsewhere. In 1998, Bill Edelman, since deceased, and Johnny Sterling, now residing in Indiana, published an inventory of Coventry's 200-plus cemeteries, including that of Coventry's number 188 Town Farm New Cemetery. Visited by noted genealogist James N. Arnold in November 1904, and depicted on George Bennison's entertaining but more informative map of 1973. Besides the farm wall, south side of the road, the Town Farm New Cemetery. No markers yet. Several are buried here. Interestingly enough, diagonally across the street was located one of two Coventry's pest farms for the contagiously sick. Several years ago, local entrepreneur Bill Marcotte of Crystal Cleaners swore that a family member told him those burials Arnold had located were in fact situated to the rear of the Biggs farm. On personal inspection, there is no way to ascertain for sure. And as for old Chet Davidson, a quick internet search indicates that he may have survived what Hazard may have considered deplorable conditions before succumbing in 1983. The internet only indicates that this rugged individualist received FDR's Social Security benefit according to Rhode Island records. And I did a cemetery search for him online and was not able to find him buried anywhere. And so ends the story of old Chet Davis in Coventry's Asylum. I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.